Hi, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Jerome Becquart. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Axiad. Axiad is a cloud-based passwordless authentication provider. We specialize in phishing resistance, passwordless authentication. And today I'm going to talk to you about one of the white papers in the series that Dean introduced at the beginning, which is focusing more on moderate assurance enterprise environment. And I'll explain a bit more about moderate assurance later on. But one of the key things there is that these are environments where you will have coexistence of multiple passkey authentication methods. So just to set the stage, and I know this has been covered in a number of presentations, but I like this slide that gives kind of an overview of different type of authentication. I think one of the key problems we're seeing, password, has been there for quite some time. We're all educated about the problem with password, both from a safety and a convenience standpoint. But what is relatively newer that has been escalating over the past couple of years is that multi-factor authentication is more widely used. We are seeing new type of attacks that are focusing on different type of MFA, right? And we've seen that some multi-factor authentication methods are not as resistant as others against phishing, which is a big problem today. Some also can be vulnerable to push bombing, and one of the presentation before talked about that. So this has brought the U.S. government, not only the U.S. government, but I'm focusing here on what's happening in North America, to produce some guidelines, both from an internal standpoint. So last year we had a directive from the OMB, the Office of Management of Budget, that is pushing the federal government to adopt phishing resistance across the board starting in 2024. But also CISA, which is the organization in the US government that provide recommendation around cybersecurity for the enterprise, the commercial market. CISA published its guideline in October of last year on encouraging people to implement phishing resistant authentication, right? We're getting to the point now where not all MFA methods are equal, and we need to move to a more secure MFA, phishing resistant. And you can see in this table, there's two standard ways to implement phishing resistance. One is FIDO / passkey, which is really this new or relatively new compared to CBA standard in terms of standard approach to phishing resistant authentication, widely adopted by the industry with increasing support every day goes. And then you've got CBA or certificate-based authentication, which is more of a legacy approach, which in the US widely deployed in federal with PIV, CAC, and it's basically X509. And so these are the two methods that enable you to get to phishing resistance. And then there is other authentication methods which are still better than password, but are not good enough if you want to protect yourself against phishing resistance. So a second thing that I wanted to cover here is, and this is a combination of what we have learned at Axiad, deploying phishing resistance authentication with our customer, as well as what the market is saying. This actually is very much aligned with a presentation that Gartner presented at the event a couple of months ago regarding best practices for successful deployments of MFA. Right. The first one is, and it's pretty common, is don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to remove all password at once or all weaker form authentication as one. You need to prioritize with the broadest impact use case. Typically, that would be, protecting access to your IDP, your federated single sign-on type of application, which typically protect all the cloud application in your ecosystem. The second one is typically Windows, Mac login, or login to your workstation. But then depending on the business you are in or the type of work environment that you have, maybe others that are also very relevant there. So prioritize, try to get some easy success first, and then move on to some of the tougher ones. The second one, which I bolded here because that's really relevant to the type of enterprise we're talking about in this white paper, is that you need to look at the safety or trust requirements. You need to look at the user experience requirements, and then identify based on that, based on the requirement, specific type of users, specific type of use case, specific type of context and environment. Maybe you need different level of trust versus UX and vice versa. And based on that, you should be able to select the right passkey authentication method that is adapted to your different user consistencies. And the good news with Passkey is that now with Sync Passkey combined with device bound, you've got a choice of options there that can really address these different requirements. And the last point I want to talk about here is, and we see the increasing importance of this when you deploy multi-factor authentication, which is think about the end-to-end user experience in terms of the credential enrollment and account recovery. And a few of my colleagues earlier in the call have been talking about this, but as we implementing MFA and improving our defenses, then the bad actors are looking at ways to still break into. And credential enrollment and account recovery can become the weaker link where either you fall back on a weaker authentication method, like maybe a one-time password or a temporary password, and then that can become a risk. So credential enrollment, I guess I should define it, is the initial enrollment of the credential, right? You get your first passkey, you enroll, or you validate the identity of the user. I remember Josh talked about it earlier about identity proofing, potentially identity verification. How do you make sure that the right credential is issued to the right person? And then more importantly, because this happens quite frequently, the issue of account recovery. If you're leveraging your phone as your passkey container, whether it's a sync passkey or device bound, what happens if you lose your phone, right? So the account, or if you replace your phone. Same thing if you locked your USB key or your security and so on. So you need to have a very good account recovery procedure. So now, sorry, I apologize for that. And I know we've been talking about it. You know, that's the prime one. You are one of the last presentation of the day when talking about passkey, but there are different type of passkey out there. So just restating here the type of definition, because as I use them in the next few slides, I want to make sure it's clear. Sync passkey, we talked about that, the value of it, the fact that it's synchronized across an ecosystem, and you can recover it from different way. Device bound, I split it in two parts, one that are platform bound, so attached to a machine, like your laptop, your phone, your iPad, and so on, and then device-bound passkeys with a dedicated hardware, which would be dedicated security keys that you can move around. So when you look at this enterprise ecosystem where you have this different type of user constituency with different requirements, you need to think about there's two aspects to select the right passkey that you need. One would be the user experience, which I'm talking about in this slide, and the next one will be around security. So in terms of user experience, there is three key workflows that are important there. The first one is, and the most important, is the authentication experience, right? That's what you do multiple times a day. You are going to log into an application, log into your machine. So that's really very important in terms of the workflow and the user experience. And there, the great news is that Passkey is providing a great user experience. And you have seen a few videos already today, so I'm not going to speak too much about that. But on this workflow, there is no real difference between sync and device bound. There will be difference in terms of depending on the type of device or methodology. You may be using biometric on top of it, or maybe a pin or a touch or something like this. But that's really device dependent. But the way you are prompted, the user experience when you log to the application is the same, which is great, which is what users need. Where you're starting to see some differentiation is account recovery. And again, we've talked a few times about that already today, but one of the big value of the Sync Passkey is that it's built to enable you to have a very good passkey recovery workflow because it's replicated in typically a cloud environment. You have it across multiple devices. If you migrate from one device to another, you have a new phone. It's not an issue. You can just synchronize it with your passkey manager. If you move to the device bound, that's a bit more painful. And I think Dean talked about that as well as Tom earlier. So there is different solutions there. If you are using a comprehensive passkey solution, you may have some functionalities there offered by the vendor, or if you're doing directly passkey with an IAM or an IDP, typically the recommended approach there would be to use multiple devices. So maybe you've got a main passkeys and a backup or a couple of backups. It works, but obviously it's a bit more painful than the passkey manager or the passkey provider, the Sync Passkey, which gives you this integrated recovery experience. Credential enrollments, that's another area where Sync Passkey are better from user experience. You enroll once, you can reuse on multiple platforms. You can actually share it across multiple platforms. Big value there. Again, better user experience. You do it once, then you forget. Platform bound, the problem here is that you will have to enroll as many passkey as you have device if they're attached to the platform. So, one for your phone, one for your Mac, your Windows machine, and so on. A bit different if you're using a dedicated safety key, because you can use the key across multiple platforms there. Now, if you look at it from a safety standpoint, then the differentiation is going in the other way, right? There is advantages in device bound that synced passkey do not have. And we've talked about it earlier. I think Tom talked about the NIST 800-63 and the level of assurance, AAL2, AAL3. So synced, typically AAL2. There's still discussion going on with NIST trying to figure out what's the right way to categorize sync passkey. But you saw, I think Tom was presenting some slide on it. It's categorized today as an AAL2. Device bound, you can get device bound passkeys that get you to AAL3. And you can have it even on FIPS approved devices. And there's a few vendors out there. So the two key elements from a safety standpoint is the storage. So in the context of the sync passkey, because the passkey is moved around and synchronized, that's part of the value. It's not attached to a device. And so it's, the storage, it's stored in multiple places, and you need to make sure it's stored the right way. While the device bound, the cryptographic element is tightly linked to the hardware. It doesn't move, it's not exposed. So for the other element is safety in transit. That's the same thing. A sync passkey is going to be shared across multiple devices and stored in the cloud. You don't really know where it has been originally created, and you don't really know, how it's communicated from one platform to another. So that's one of the key things with sync passkey, and I think Tom talked about that earlier, which is you need to be questioning, and you need to ask your passkey provider information about their sync fabric, right? How do they secure it? How do they protect it? Because there's a lot of good solution out there, but there is no any certification program today from a passkey from a FIDO Alliance standpoint, and there is no standardization of this sync fabric. So you're depending on the passkey provider to implement it the right way. Again, there are plenty of vendors out there and they're doing the right thing, but you need to ask them and validate on your own. On the device bound, there is no safety in transit, obviously, because it's attached to a hardware. You cannot move around, and that's how it can be. It can achieve some higher level of security there. So. Now, this is the good news, right? So I'm showing here in the quadrant form, security on one axis, usability on the other. And you can see that both type of passkeys we've been around talking about today are in the top right quadrant. And I don't know if you're familiar with quadrant, but the top right is where you want to be. That's a good quadrant, right? You're in good companies there. It's a good crowd, which means that whatever version of passkey you're using, you will have good usability and you will have good security, right? It's phishing resistant, whether it's things or device bound. It's using asymmetric cryptography. It's not replayable. And we've talked about it earlier. So great level of security. However, if you need AAL3 or if you need something that is bound to hardware, high level of security, device bound is better for that type of user population. Sync passkey, better in terms of usability. We've talked about that. The account recovery, the enrollment, you enroll once, are reused in multiple places, great benefits there. But again, what's important there to remember is that both are good, but they all are better in one dimension than the other. Now, what does it mean from a deployment standpoint? Well, it really depends on your regulatory requirement. We've talked, I think Tom talked about it earlier, with customers that, for example, want to have hardware safety device or device-bound passkeys for their sysadmin because these are privileged users. They need a higher level of security. So that's the type of environment where device-bound would be used. Or if they deal with government business, maybe you've got a business unit that deal with the U.S. Department of Defense. That would be typically an area where an AAL3 device would be better. And kind of what I'm summarizing here on this slide, what the white paper talk about is hybrid passkey deployment is what we see for this type of customers, this medium assurance environment where you need a mix of both. And the separation between the type of user will depend on your business, right? But if you look at it, there is really two categories of users. The first one we'll call standard users that would be a population today that typically use password. That's why you see still a lot of password out there. Or push notification. And today it's more often than not push notification with number matching, which is kind of the more secure way of doing push notification to prevent against push bombing. For that type of population, the recommendation there is to move to sync passkey, because compared to password or even push notification, this is phishing resistant. And on top of that, so more secure. And on top of that, it also gives you a better user experience, right? Password is painful. You need to change them every 90 days and so on. Help desk is a pain in the butt. Sync passkey much better there. Push notification with number matching, also not great from a user experience because of this number matching piece on top of it. And less secure, less user-friendly. Sync passkey is a better solution there. And then for your privileged users, which again, depending on the type of business you are in, maybe different group of people, typically sysadmin will fall there, regulated business unit, few companies deployment we've done where there are, a group that does, maybe some specific project around healthcare and sharing information about, how you call it, diagnostic and stuff like that. They have some requirements there where it's better to have a higher security solution. Or business unit dealing with the DoD or Veterans Affairs or any government agencies. For this type of environment, that's typically where you find good old school hardware OTP token, like RSA token or any kind of one-time password out there. Also where you see a lot of these smart card or USB key leveraging CBA. Also, this is a space of the PIF card, SIF card, and so on. For that type of users that typically have higher level of safety requirements, device-bound passkeys, whether it's bound to the machine or a specific hardware safety device, are the right solutions there because they provide you this higher level of security. Now, I need to talk a bit about FIDO attestation and why it's important in this hybrid deployment environment. So attestation is an optional FIDO features that is designed to enhance the registration process. Basically, what it does is enable a passkey to provide information about what type of passkey it is, who is the manufacturer. So this is contained through an information called the AA GUID. As it can also provide information like the type of encryption that it's using, the capabilities of the device, and so on. So this will enable you, really enables the relaying party to know what type of passkey is being enrolled or being used. So this is a good concept. The problem today with attestation is that it has an uneven support across the passkey ecosystem. So you see decent size of adoption for hardware passkey manufacturer that provide typically attestation, so to tell you, okay, this is a passkey model 5 or whatever, manufactured by manufacturer X. This is widely available there for hardware passkey manufacturer. However, on the other end of the spectrum, no support as of today. This may have changed because this sync passkey is a new areas, but as of today, none of the big sync passkey provider are supporting FIDO attestation. And you will ask me, okay, why do I care? Why is it relevant? Well, the problem with this hybrid environment we're talking about, where you have different type of passkey, you want to enforce that for this privileged user category, the ones that need to use more secure type of passkey for specific use case or environments, you need to be able to validate either at enrollment time when you enroll these users, or at application access time that they are using a passkey that you want them to use, right? You want them to use the device-bound passkey for maybe a sysadmin role or access to a specific application. The only way to do that today in the FIDO ecosystem would be through attestation, where you gather the information from the passkey and say, okay, that's a device manufactured by X in this condition. This is this model, and this is on the list of approved device. This is okay for that type of users. On this one, no, it doesn't fit the same requirements, so I can't use it. So the lack of broad support for attestation make it challenging to be able to know what type of passkey you're dealing with. And you can extend it, and I think Tom talked about it in this presentation earlier, that if there was a passkey manager or passkey provider that had some safety issues, because that happened in the past for different safety provider, you could have a passkey provider that has problem, that happen. you won't be able to know it by by interacting this passkey. You won't know how to separate this bad passkey provider from another one. So that's a potential safety challenge there. So today you've got a solution there, which is you can implement on your IDP side or on your relaying party, doing allo listing based on the AA grid. So you can leverage the fact that most of the hardware devices, so the one you'll probably use for this higher trust environment, will provide you this attestation and have an AA grid. So you could use that and allo list them to say, oh, I will only accept this type of passkey for the type of users. And if there is no AA grid provided, you would assume that this is not an approved passkey there. It's not pretty straightforward. It does require a little bit more work, but it's working. It's feasible. There is discussion within the FIDO Alliance on how we better improve on that. Or do we have maybe a broader acceptance of attestation, of an evolution of the attestation concept to be able to address this type of use case, to be able to know that, hey, I'm dealing with a passkey from a source that I can trust for this given environment. And that's it for my presentation today. I know I have a few minutes for questions.
Hi, Jerome. Thank you so much for that presentation. Question regarding your last slide there. So what information does the RP get with the sync passkey, if any?
At this stage, it's a little bit of a black box if you look at the standard implementation. So not much. This is why there's a gap there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I would just note that, and I think that Dean mentioned this or Tom during their presentations today, but that it's an active conversation within the FIDO Alliance around how to provide adequate signals to folks that need higher levels of assurance.
Yeah, there's two things in that area. One is the signals. The other one, which is looking at maybe a certification process, so that you have some level of assurance for the different passkey provider or sync passkeys that they meet some level of safety standard to remove some of the uncertainty there.
Oh, that's that's actually a really excellent thing to bring up. So Andrew Schicke, our executive director and CMO, did make an announcement in Identiverse that we are in the process of identifying the criteria for such a certification program for all passkeys providers, particularly to allow third-party passkeys providers, which are the password managers that folks have been talking about all summit, to be able to sort of attest to the security of their respective platforms. Yeah, exactly. So the question regarding hybrid, this is similar to a question that I asked Josh in the previous session, but when looking at a hybrid environment like that, it's all FIDO2, but what does that look like from like a management perspective?
Well, that's really I think, depending on your solution provider, the type of management tool that you have. But the beauty with Passkey is that even if there's different form factor and different option, the way they work and the way you can manage them shouldn't be any different, right? So again, that depends a bit on the vendor, but you have tools that enable you to see the level of usage and deployment of your different passkeys, so that you know who is using what, and you should be able to manage them with a consistent set of tools, right? You don't want to have a solution for your sync passkey and a solution for your device bound passkeys. The best approach there should be consolidated so that you can, from one set of tools, see all your passkeys in a consolidated way.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's just worth noting that, so let's say, you have no FIDO in your organization at the moment, and you want to move to FIDO. Could you just touch on what the options are? I mean, from just the perspective of like, just build your own versus leveraging a vendor, because I think there's a little bit of confusion sometimes around like who do I actually work with, or do I have to work with someone, or should I work with someone?
Well, so, and I think it was touched early on, right? Most of the IDPs, so your IAM, the core part of your IAM tools, support Passkey one way or another. So you can implement it directly. They support synced or device-bound Passkey. What a dedicated solution will add on top of that is the consistency in the management tool, so that whatever device you're using, you should be able to have capabilities for the account recovery, the enrollment that is consistent, whatever the device, as well as give you the tool from a risk management standpoint to see, okay, what's the status of my ecosystem in terms of Passkey deployment? Who is using what and what type of device? Are only the right users using the right type of device and so on?
Right. It just struck me that if you're really going for a hybrid environment, having that level of insight into what's going on would be pretty important to ensure
Absolutely.
that your privileged users are doing what they should be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's just one other question, which is given that synced passkeys, were announced, like a year ago or so, have the FIDO vendors, like, to your knowledge, are they pretty caught up with those sorts of tools, and are they available today?
There's still a lot of things happening, right? We talked about Apple being the first one to release a passkey manager or sync passkey platform, Google following suit, Microsoft still working on some of this solution, a number of passkey managers. So that's one of the things that with the introduction of passkey in the spring of last year, there's still a lot of moving parts, and attestation was a good example of a kind of a new challenge that came up from the sync passkey concept. So it's I would say it's still evolving, and so the recommendation there is that there are some tools and vendors out there, but it's still moving. And so what you need to be careful when you select your partner is find somebody that is thinking ahead and planning for the future, because things are still changing.
Right. It's only been a year. I keep saying it seems like we're there, but we still have some ways to go. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jerome. That was a great presentation. I'm pleased that we have Sean Miller from RSA here with us to present our last session of the day, which is for enterprises with high assurance use cases. We're just going to get him set up, and we will be with you in just a moment.